Good evening and welcome to The Black Church, a panel discussion with a special focus tonight on music and the role of the church. This program is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people and the members of WBGO. Thanks for joining us. I'm WBGO News Director Doug Doyle, and thrilled to be joined by a star-studded lineup this evening. We have Shayla Harris joining us. Shayla is award-winning independent director and producer based in New York. She joins us from Brooklyn tonight. Shayla produced and directed 2 episodes of the 4-part The Black Church series with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. that will air on PBS on February 16th and 17th at 9 p.m. She was also a producer of Who Killed Malcolm X, a 6-part documentary series for Fusion Netflix that was nominated for an Emmy. Thanks so much for being here, Shayla.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about a series that I'm really, really proud of.
And well, you should be, and we're excited that you're here tonight. Also joining us is one of the most influential men and powerful speakers in New Jersey and beyond. When it comes to religion, education, business, and many other arenas, Reverend Dr. M. William Howard, former pastor of Bethany Baptist Church here in Newark. So great to see you, Dr. Howard, joining us from Lawrenceville tonight.
Yes, good to see you, Doug.
And I love your tie. We'll be joined a little bit later, hopefully, by the inspirational talent who has an incredible moving voice. That would be jazz and gospel singer Lizz Wright. And we will have a special performance from her no matter what this evening as this program moves along. Also, we're joined tonight on our panel by someone who really needs no introduction if you've been following WBGO through the years. Dorthaan Kirk is not only an NEA jazz master, but was part of the team with owner Bob Ottenhoff, who got WBGO off the ground more than 42 years ago. Right moments, Dorthaan.
Right moments, and thanks for inviting me.
We're excited as well to have DK join us for The Black Church, a panel discussion. Let's take a sneak peek right now at the powerful PBS documentary.
This is our story.
The Black Church has sustained the African American people from the days of slavery to this day.
I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
The role of music in the Black Church is everything.
We had to have some individual and institutional armor in order to preserve our sanity.
We are a testament to the goodness and the grace of God.
The Black Church, this February, only on PBS.
Shayla, I know this documentary is near and dear to you. So tell us, first of all, what people should be getting out of this documentary series, in your opinion, and how has it changed you?
Well, this series is probably one of the most personal ones for Dr. Gates. As you all, if you're PBS watchers, you know he's been at the forefront of uncovering lots of African-American history. And this one, I think, was something that it took him a long time to come around to, but I think it's coming out at the exact right time. And the conversations that we have within the series about the role of faith in politics, the role of faith in helping people overcome adversity and oppression is certainly conversations that everyone can relate to, particularly, you know, with what everybody has been experiencing in the last year. So this series really looks at 400 years of the Black Church in America, and intentionally started with the Atlantic slave trade in order to give people an understanding that the early and enslaved Africans who came to this country came with their own faith practices that helped transform the Christianity that they experienced here. And that transformation, pushed the church in a lot of new directions, but also laid the groundwork for the church playing a pivotal role in things that a lot of people know about, like the civil rights movement and things like that. And, so we wanted to talk about that sort of experience of the church, but we also wanted to delve deeply into the cultural expression that came out of the church as well. So music is, one of the tent poles of the Black church. And, in every hour, we felt like it was important to showcase some of the evolution of the music that emerged from the Black church. And so for someone like me who grew up in the Catholic Church, which isn't really, the prototypical Black church experience. It was really incredible for me to learn this history and to experience some of these services in these churches and to be able to share that with these audiences.
I certainly know what it feels like to first go into a church that you haven't really experienced, and just how you can be overwhelmed by, the power of the service. Say, why haven't I been here before, right?
Exactly.
So first of all, we want to say hi to Lizz Wright, jazz and gospel singer joining us from Chicago. Liz, great to see you.
Hi, it's great to see and be with all of you. What a wonderful conversation to be having too. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Dr. Howard, you and I had a conversation about a week ago on the phone, and you talked about your thoughts on why people go to church. And I thought it was really intriguing. Can you share with our audience tonight your thoughts on that?
Well, I think people outside the church would probably be surprised to understand that the core of the church is really what Dr. West referred to in the introduction that you played. The church is a place of identity, a place of encouragement, of affirmation. You see, in context, the Black church is produced by America's original sin. And the people who populate Black congregations are buffeted back and forth by those forces 24/7. And when they come to church, when they enter the door of the sanctuary, they're going on a retreat of unquestioned acceptance of their humanity, their dignity, and fellowship and community is vitally important. Now, the church serves other functions, but this is not why people go to church. They go to church for that sense of connection with the eternal and with the deep enrichment of unbridled fellowship and acceptance.
Liz, most people know by now your background. You grew up in Georgia, father a minister, you sang gospel in the church. So how did that shape you as a youngster? And is it still shaping you the same way growing up in the church and performing in the church right now?
Definitely. Doug, I learned through the communal singing and eating and talking and conducting of service that I belong to the people and they belong to me. So there's always this idea that I'm not separated from the people, and that, I am always being, even as a little girl, elevated by the call and response inside of everything that we do. And so even now, when I stand in front of an audience, of course, I want them to be at ease. I am there to entertain them. I do understand, my work, and I respect it. At the same time, I want them to know that they are a part of what they're experiencing, and that sometimes, well, not sometimes, I think the best thing I can do is to take everybody back to that gift of the church experience, which is knowing that we do all have this kind of elevated part of our humanity where it's just, it's out with full wings, and we really do feel grateful for being alive. We feel grateful for everything that works and doesn't quite work, and it's still miraculous to be human. And I always want to leave people with that feeling and to get inside of that myself every time I'm singing the gospel or singing at all, for that matter. So I thank the church for that, for making that important, making that almost kind of transcendental practice something I had to figure out how to get a hold of constantly, even as a child. But at the same time, it's not so hard because you're never on your own. We're always in this together. I think that's the thing I'm most excited about that the church gave me as a perspective.
If for some reason you've never heard Lizz Wright sing, we have a treat for you tonight. It's one of my favorite songs that she performs, and it's coming up a little bit later on this program. Dorthaan, affectionately known at WBGO as just DK. Dorthaan, why did you bring Jazz Vespers to Bethany Baptist Church? Why was it important for you to see music as part of the service at your church?
Well, Dr. Howard should elaborate on that, but Dr. Howard came to Bethany in 2000, and it was his idea. And little did I know, he had already done his research on me, so he had a plan when he came there. And I think I'll just let him share how we came to do Vespers, particularly in a Baptist church, which is, as I'm told, completely unheard of. So I'd love for Dr. Howard to pick it up from there.
And I'd love to have Liz talk about the time he came very early in this adventure, I'll call it. But we had the minister to the jazz community from St. Peter's come and participate in the first Jazz Vespers at Bethany, the first formal Jazz Vespers. And I remember him saying, Dorthaan, we believe this music belongs in the church because we refuse to let the devil have all the good music. But the truth is, it's the commercial interests that have commodified and made distinctions in our music. But for the deity, which we find in gospel music and the spirituals, you don't hear it in jazz, but the music is essentially a continuum. If we say that jazz emanates from the blues, you see, the blues is good news without a reference to the deity. Are you with me? See, Dorthaan has heard me reference Albert King. I mean, everybody knows B.B. King, but Albert King has a song which I loved, much to the chagrin of my Episcopalian mother-in-law, which went like, it was the local laundromat blues. He says, I met my baby down at the local laundromat. And I talked about this in a sermon once at Bethany. And I said, you know, most of us would admit to ourselves, if not to others, that the worst place in the world to us is the laundromat. You know, we go because we have to go, but we don't like to go because people steal our clothes if we step out for a minute, all of these experiences. I said, but think of it. Albert King went to this dreadful place called the laundromat, but he met his baby down there. And that's good news. Now, I think what happened with us at Bethany, and I think Dorthaan, who is the queen of this music, is sitting in the congregation accepting whatever, she likes all kinds of music, but she never imagined that her music called jazz would be featured in her church. I think that's right, Dorthaan. So there were a lot of jazz lovers at Bethany. And I remember Deacon Brown. Deacon Brown used to play tenor in the clubs in Newark. He told me one day on the way to the cemetery, he said, no, it was actually Martha who told me, his wife. She said, Pastor, you know, my husband used to play in the clubs in Newark. And I looked at him, I said, Deacon Brown, you played in the clubs? He said, yes. I said, what'd you play? He said, I played a mean tenor. I said, well, where's your tenor? He says, it's in the attic, you know, the pads are bad and it's all dusty. I said, brother, you got to get your horn out, because when he became a deacon, he was told he had to give up his music. And to me, that is profoundly sad. We have forced this music into clubs where they're drinking, and then we blame them for being in the clubs because they're drinking. And I remember when Wycliffe Gordon came to Bethany early in the Jazz Vespers, which is now what, 20 years old, Dorthaan, huh?
Yes, we were celebrating 20 years when the pandemic hit. We were able to get through March, but we didn't make it through the last month, which would have been June.
So Wycliffe is from Augusta, Liz, and the Vespers ran till about 7:30 on a Saturday, and at around 7:25 or so, Wycliffe said, I feel so good playing in the church. This is where I first heard music, but they wouldn't let me play my music in the church. So would you please just let me play a little while longer? You don't have to stay, but just let me play. Now, nobody's going to move if Wycliffe is playing, right? This is the experience that too many of our artists, gifted by their communal experience, as Liz has referred to it, in the church. But then they have to go into exile because they understand that we serve a sovereign God who is just as much the God of this music as any other music. I think it was Carrie Smith's funeral. When Carrie passed away, to the congregation, which was populated by all kinds of great people in the music business. And I said, God loved Carrie, not despite the fact that she sang the blues, but because she sang the blues. And people came to me in the repast afterwards, literally with water in their eyes, because they wanted to be affirmed, but they felt like exiles. And in the beginning, Bethany members, we had those who loved jazz who were saying, Dr. Howard, I'm with you, let's make this happen. We went to St. Peter's, and we had this wonderful woman, tell me her name again, I'm looking at her face, Juanita Fleming. Juanita Fleming, you're on mute, Dorthaan. Juanita Fleming performed at the St. Peter's Vespers, and we had 3 touring buses, Doug. We were going in the church van, but by the time we actually went, we had 3 touring buses, a motorcade, and people went also by public transportation. And we started out, Dorthaan brought the best, you know. Dorthaan asks, and they come.
They do.
But after a few years, we would have musicians who would come and they said, you were making me have self-doubt because all of my friends had performed at the Jazz Vespers and I was never invited. So it almost became like, hey, Dorthaan, when are you going to have me over? And this is a star-studded cast, It's hard to actually think of people who haven't been there. And it's really due to the reputation of Dorthaan Kirk as a person who is knowledgeable about the music, but also who has extreme regard for the performing artists.
Let me just step in just for a moment, Dr. Howard, because Shayla, I wanted to ask you about, in this documentary, there is a talk about the conflict of Saturday night music versus Sunday morning service. And so after hearing Dr. Howard talk about how wonderful it has been to bring in music to his church and to others, how do you feel about now this documentary bringing in the connection through the years of all kinds of music, including Rosetta Tharpe?
Yeah. Well, Rosetta Tharpe was an education for me on this series, and she is a beast on the guitar, and she's amazing and incredible. And you know, we do explore in the series this tension between the Saturday night and the Sunday morning. And I think one of the things that we show in the series is that the music of the church has reflected the period of the time. So that the gospel music that we came to know was this sort of amalgamation of like hymns and blues music. And, you know, even in the contemporary moment, there's hymns and hip hop music. And so, you know, there is this constant push of the church to speak to the world as it is and not just exist in some other realm. You know, not just to focus on heaven, but to focus on what people's life is here, like on earth. And so those tensions were things that we explored. And the music is just one way of, you know, unpacking that story. But yeah, the music is so integral to the church experience. And yeah, I loved hearing Dr. Howard's story about how he brought it into the church.
But Shayla, in Georgia, I'm Liz, you might not remember, but I'm from Americus, which is a hot minute from Vienna, right? So we used to say in Americus, without Saturday night, who needs Sunday morning?
That's amazing.
Wow.
The other thing that is at the core of Bill Howard, quite apart from the music, is that I want faith, people who are committed to faith, to have one life that is consistent wherever they happen to be. And I preached a sermon in the church once called "You Better Be Glad I'm in Church." And I'm going to relate that to what you said about the separation, Sunday and Saturday. And I'm going to refer you to a YouTube called Nuevo Gumbo that I do with Reverend Greg Edwards out in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was in the traveling band with Ray Charles, played tenor sax. And we talk about this issue of the separation of the music. And I think there are 3 or 4 of these YouTube videos. But what I can say to you is, you better be glad I'm in church is exactly about this bifurcation. I heard a woman, they were in the kitchen and they were preparing something, maybe cleaning up the kitchen, and they were in a little bit of a, you know, bumping heads, you know, and one turned to the other, "You better be glad I'm in church." Now, what that meant is, if I were out in the parking lot, I would whip you see? But since I'm in church, I'm going to act pleasant toward you. And I thought, what a shame it is that we live a life in the parking lot that's different from the life we live in the church. So that's one of my missions, you might say. And the issue is the people who object to bringing Saturday night into Sunday morning is that they were there Saturday night. Do you understand? And they're trying to keep their Sunday experience as if it were separate, but it's all the same. My mother sang in the church choir, but she also sang on the stage of the Harlem Theater on Cotton Avenue in Americus, Georgia.
Dr. Howard, I could listen to you read a phone book, but we're not going to do that tonight because we have other panel members and we're going to get, but at this point, though, before Liz, I want you to talk about connections between jazz, gospel, and church. Let's get a musical performance from the amazing Lizz Wright that we all can enjoy right now.
Can you lose your song when you have sung it? You sung it for so long. And how can you forget? How can you forget your dance when the dance is, oh, it's all you ever had? separate the two. Oh, no, no. It's impossible to do, just like the salt in the stew. Hey, hey, it's all a part of you. Yeah, one thing that life cannot do, life can't do it, no. It can't take your song from you. So when life brings your chance to give your part away, don't just stand there feeling scared. Ain't time to be afraid. There could be a treasure waiting on you right there. It could be right there. Now listen good, real good to the truth. It does not matter. It don't matter what to do. Oh no, it's still gonna be in you, just like the salt in the stew. Yeah, it's all a part of you. Yes, it is. And the one thing that life, it cannot do, no, I know for myself, it won't take your song from you. Hey, go right on, you just go right on, find a way. Don't you know it's yours, yours. It won't take your song from you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yes. Gary Walker just joined in on Facebook and said, takes me back, because Liz performed that live at WBGO several years ago, and we've never forgot that performance, Liz. And, you know, joy comes to mind when I watch you perform, and thanks to Kenny Banks Sr. on the piano there joining you and accompanying you. So make the connection for us, Liz. Jazz, gospel, and church. What's your connection there?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that I really love everything I'm hearing you all say. Dr. Howard, I could sit and listen to you talk about anything. It just makes my soul happy, what you're saying and what you've done for people in music. You know, I remember when I was 19, 20 years old, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was going to the church where my dad had pretty much dropped me off. So I grew up in Middle Georgia. I went to Dad's church. Then when it was time to go to college, I went to Georgia State University, and I was basically plopped down in the middle of downtown Atlanta. I didn't know what to do with myself. So Dad sort of chose a church for me to sort of drop me off at. And I went there, and I remember walking around and asking a bunch of ministers, hey, what do you think of me singing in the club? What do you think of me singing in the club and in church? I really want to sing about everyday things. I want to sing about life, and I don't need to do anything that, you know, would seduce anyone or lead them astray in any way. I just want to be able to sing about, I don't know, regular stuff. Is that okay? And I remember asking all these people, kind of surveying the ministers at this massive church, and I got such a perfect balance of "don't you dare" and "oh, that would be great." So I really, I took my life in hand, and treated it like something I had in the laboratory. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I know after all these years of being in ministry from a child, I know how to hear from God. I know how to feel my way through. I do trust my spirit, and I'm going to walk this out quietly so I don't disrupt my parents' reputation or get too far ahead of my own and shadow that. But I'm going to figure out why I want to sing everything, why I want to, and how I'm going to be with everybody. Because I just felt so called to sing like about life, in a way that made people think about their own spirituality on their own. And I didn't understand why I felt this. So I tried to take ownership of my questions, and I started ducking into the clubs, and I learned a few standards. I had a book of charts. I was asking musicians, how do you do this? Who should I listen to? I was really walking around like I had a big empty bowl, and everybody gave me something. And Atlanta was an amazing place to, hey, Ron Simlis, that was my first manager. Look at him over there. So Ron actually was a great part of my basket and my gathering what I could from the local jazz community in Atlanta. And I asked everybody, who to listen to and what to do. And I sat in with the same pianist that you just saw me with when I knew 2 standards to my name. I've been listening to Nancy Wilson, and I sang those 2 standards in the keys that I could handle. And then I didn't know what to do. And because the audience was asking for another song, and I was just a guest. And I remember, that was a time where there were only a few trusted singers that the band really liked. The other ones they kind of tolerated. And I was trying to cross that threshold. So I remember looking back at the same pianist that you just saw me sing with, that I've now been playing with for 22 years. And I said to him, hey, I ain't got no more standards. And the audience is clapping the whole time. I turn around and I'm like, hey, Kenny, can you just play Amazing Grace, like a blues or something? Can you just, I ain't got nothing left. So my life as Lizz Wright, as you know, began that moment that I swung around and sang Amazing Grace, and I let myself bring my full humanity into that song. It had, prayer and longing and lust and confusion and hope and all of it in it. It had everything, and it made more sense to me in that moment than it ever did. And I didn't even know Amazing Grace had a place like that inside of it. And nobody could have told me that it did until I tried to take shelter in it in such a way. And so singing that as a blues changed my life and was almost like a kind of, Ron's like, all true, she really did it. Yeah, it was a little ritual for me. And I came into this understanding that the truth is in the music. The truth is also in our needs, I really appreciate how people like, Dr. Howard believe in bringing our full humanity back to what we're doing. Sometimes by the time we realize what we have lost or given away, we don't remember why we've done it. And it's hard to bear the cost of what we have missed by being only parts of ourselves in certain places. So gosh, I'm so thankful for jazz, because it is, of all genres of music, one that really welcomes all of us back, as whole people to the table, where we grab all of these threads that make up the story of who we are and where we're from. And they are all welcome, all these pieces. So that's my story.
and Liz, I wanted to touch upon the fact that you mentioned loss. And so I want to ask Dorthaan and Dr. Howard the same question. But DK, I want to go to you first, because you are a true churchgoer. And, loss during this time, during COVID, during, troubled times with social justice matters, a lot of people are lost. A lot of people are looking for answers. What has the church done for Dorthaan Kirk during this time period?
I'm going to answer that, Doug, but before I do, I've just been so anxious to say this. Lizz Wright was one of the first, I suppose you would say, national stars to perform at Bethany, and it was such of a special weekend because her dad and her brother happened to be in town, and she and her brother and her dad sang at Bethany. And I don't know if Bethany will ever be the same again. And I've followed her ever since Ron brought her to New York. And I just love her. She knows that. And I'm happy to have worked with her in different settings. One was with Jerry Allen at Bethany. So I'm just happy that I've been able to work with her. But to answer your question, during COVID, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and one was about what's going to happen with Jazz Vespers. We haven't done anything virtual yet. Will we be able to convene? If we do, is it going to be well attended as it has been in the past? So I've been thinking that maybe jazz will come back to the community after COVID. I have tons of ideas. I've shared some of them with Dr. Howard already. And next week, I'm doing a talk with Queens College about jazz in the Black community. So I haven't really focused a lot on church as the Sunday service goes, but because I am the one that's responsible for asking artists to come to Bethany, that's what I've been thinking about. How can we bring the music back to the community? And I do think it can happen.
Dr. Howard, before I have you comment, I want to play a highlight of the documentary, The Black Church. It's coming up on PBS on the 16th and 17th at 9 p.m. Host Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. stopping at the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia.
As the free black community slowly began to grow in the years before the Declaration of Independence, the first institutions that they created, along with their enslaved sisters and brothers, were houses of worship. One of the earliest was in Savannah, Georgia. Today, it's known as the First African Baptist Church.
Reverend, I feel like I'm in the presence of black church religious history. Tell me the story of this church. It's like a miracle.
Well, the church actually had its beginnings in 1773 when George Lowe, who was a slave, was granted permission to preach up and down the Savannah River. In August of 1777, he was able to obtain his freedom. He was able to also constitute the church. That same year.
You know what I love about this church? I always, whenever I go into a black church, I look to see what color God is. What color are the angels? What color is Jesus? Your saints are your predecessors who founded and perpetuated the tradition. I think that's brilliant.
This sanctuary actually would not have been built if it had not been for Andrew Cox Marshall, who preached for 44 years about how he wanted to build a brick church, not just the temporary wooden buildings that had been built. When we think of those who built the church, definitely of recent African descent, this building has so many symbols in it that are codes for various things in the windows and the ceiling, on the side of the pews.
After long days of labor, the free and enslaved members of First African Baptist worked through the night to create a home in which to worship their God. The people who built these pews paid homage to Christ, but also left a surprising trace of another African religious past, Islam.
Dr. Howard, wanted to get your reaction first to that clip. Need to unmute yourself there, Dr. Howard.
I was just saying, I have been in that church. I've been in that pulpit. And the first thing I'll say about that location is it is an active, living congregation of worshipers to this moment. But you also know that you're in the presence of some really profound history when you're there. Even the carvings in the pulpit. Shayla, I don't know if you happen to notice that, but that's my memory in Savannah. And I was very happy to hear Dr. Gates say it was one of the early churches, because there's a great debate about what is really the first Baptist church. But back to the COVID question, it's a question I've had. I think Zoom and other media have helped us stay in touch with each other. But the essence of the church cannot be captured on an artificial medium. The essence of the church is physical presence. It's hugging, it's laughing, it's eating. Liz mentioned eating before. We like to eat in the church, and I'm not always happy with what we choose to eat. And it's going to be tough to sustain the depth of the church's gift to us if we can't get back together soon. That's my thinking. I mean, the notion that we're on the verge of breaking through and getting back, it warms my heart, because I know what is at stake. You can't feel any chewing gum under the pew on a Zoom, you see? So I just think, even the movement of kids, little kids, we don't see little kids on Zoom, but it's so critical to the nature of the church's mission and the identity of the people. So it's one of my concerns. Now, I mentioned the Reverend out in Allentown. I've been talking to him, trying to understand what is he thinking about, because he's an active pastor, about re-entry. And I do think this is very important. We've got to have some rituals for re-entry. First of all, we've lost a lot of people. In New Jersey, we've lost like 20,000 people. Every congregation has lost someone, or everybody in every congregation knows someone who has died from COVID. So we've got to have a memorial ritual. We got to have a celebration ritual. And for God's sake, let's don't just open the doors one Sunday and we all go back and sit down and do what we've been doing. Let's mark the period of mourning, but also with gratitude and thanksgiving. And so I'm saying, I think we've been sustained a bit in the interim by the technology, but boy, do I look forward to churches being able to gather again and hear those choir members hit those bad notes. Musician hit that old piano and the key won't sound. I think we need that, and we hunger for this. And I think Dorthaan's concerned about the Vespers. I think she's right. The potential of this music, which I believe is sacred, coming back to the community. And what she means by that is, so often, Liz, musicians have been relegated to performances in places that are not populated by the people who give the music its energy. Okay, so if we can figure out, first of all, we got to pay these musicians, but if they're performing in Madison Square Garden, we can't compete with that in terms of revenue. But will they want as they do in the Vespers. You know, Vespers is designed so that if John Faddis has a gig in the city at 9, he can play at Bethany and make his paying gig, because, you know, the truth is told, we don't pay club wages, do we? Do we, Dorthaan? So that's my initial thought about the church and this period.
So before we touch base with Shayla Harris on this, we have some people that have been chatting along with us in the chat. We're going to get to you a little bit later, but I do want to pass along that Victoria, one of our viewers, is asking for some prayer. She's going through some tough times, so we're all with you, Victoria, and we thank you for joining us tonight. Shayla, it is a tough time, and with this documentary coming out now, was it specifically planned in advance that it would air during the pandemic, or had this just kind of just worked out that way? Because it seems like people need this more than ever. They need church. They need something to cling to, like Dr. Howard was talking about.
Yeah, no, it was not planned. I mean, now I think it's probably was divine intervention that it's landing at this particular moment. We started production in early 2019 and finished, the initial stages of the final stages of production just as the quarantine was hitting last March, and then finished it shortly thereafter. And the original plan to run the series was November 2020, but our original plan was that, that was an election month, and, nobody's going to want to be seeing anything else but politics, and we didn't want to get overwhelmed by that. And so, it just so happens that we're coming out at this moment where there still is this massive political conversation, this racial reckoning that's been happening for the last few months, and certainly the impact of people experiencing such trauma and such loss and such grief with the pandemic. And I think the stories that we share in the series are really those stories of resilience and faith and hope and healing. And, to Dr. Howard's point, the fact that we can't all be together to be talking about this series is just the most heartbreaking part of it. And, we're so lucky that we were able to shoot the things that we shot and experience the things that we shot before, we came to this moment where we couldn't all be together. And so it is really tough to watch some of the scenes in the film where there's, a church full of people and everybody's singing and everybody's hugging and touching and, and greeting people for Easter and all that stuff, because we're also traumatized by not having had that sort of touch and that connection and being in that space and feeling that like community. And so, it pales in comparison to the real thing, but I think being able to have a conversation about the role of faith and what it could play in this moment, to kind of acknowledge what we've all been through and to give ourselves some energy and some drive to keep going forward. I think that was sort of, for me, the big lesson of this series, and hopefully the conversations around it will engender that for folks.
The voice of Lizz Wright gives us energy, and she's one of our panel members tonight. First of all, our very own Leslie Harrison, great singer in her own right, wants to know, Liz, was your first New York City gig at the Jazz Gallery?
Yes, it was actually. Wow. Dale and Rio really gave me a chance to kind of figure out what I was going to do in New York and how I was going to get along with her, as I say. Yeah. Wow. What a memory. I mean, I guess my first gig was really the audition for the record deal, but the first gig where I wasn't, sweating and under pressure, I think it was at the Jazz Gallery. Yeah, what a wonderful place. I really have them to thank for helping me connect to the music community in New York and just to New York, period. It's been such a great place for so many musicians to cut their teeth and find their sound and their place. Yeah.
Liz, your pastor, you mentioned to me this week, is in the Black Church on PBS.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am actually a really proud member of Trinity United Church of Christ. I hadn't been an active churchgoer for years, but I came here and I just fell in love with, the city of Chicago and with my pastor, and just with there's an attitude of can and will here amongst people that I just a color that I hadn't seen anywhere else. That's just a little bit different. I mean, New Yorkers, are created to get it done too, but it's different in Chicago. There's a lot of Southern transplants here, a lot of a different kind of grit that's really beautiful and that I just had not seen anywhere else. And I really love my pastor. He's a Morehouse graduate, very poetic, Dr.
Reverend Moss.
Otis Moss III, yes. And I just love his way of speaking and thinking. And I absolutely love, as with Dr. Howard, his appreciation for music, for jazz. He often references the music and iconic, musicians as he speaks to illuminate things in the Bible. I mean, he really talks. One of my favorite things he talks about is the blue note and the in between. And so I just absolutely love that he understands, the poetry that kind of runs between the verse of Bible and standards.
And Liz, that's that Morehouse in him,
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I know that's the type of man I'm learning.
Well, his father, he comes from a legacy of preachers. His father was also a pastor at Ebenezer, Martin Luther King's church. So he's earned his stripes,
Yeah.
That's too, Shayla.
Hey, DK, not to make the guy with the bow tie blush tonight, but what has Dr. Howard done for your life? Seeing you for so many years in the hallways of WBGO and you talking about this wonderful man, what has he meant to you? What do you want to talk to him about tonight and share with our audience here as we talk about The Black Church, the PBS documentary that's airing on the 16th and 17th at 9 o'clock? But right now, he's right there above you on our screen. What do you want to say to him?
And who is this I'm talking to?
DK's talking to you.
Oh, DK is talking.
We need to unmute Dorthaan so she can answer that question.
Doug, that's a large question, but this is how I'm going to answer it. There have been a lot of people that have touched my life in different ways. Bob Odenhoff, who founded WBGO, but Dr. Howard is right up there with the top of the people that have touched my life, and I'm blessed to have known him, still know him, even though he's not our minister anymore. We talk on the phone, and I have a saying, and some of my friends that are looking tonight will get it. When you call Dr. Howard, say you have one thing to talk to him about, one simple thing, I guarantee you the phone conversation, he'll answer that. But the conversation, and this is literally, it'll be 2.5, 3 hours, 3.5. Why is that? Because when you talk to him, one thing leads to another, and that leads to something else. And I have learned so much from him over the years, even when 2 of my older grandkids were going to start college. Each one had different issues. What did I do? I said, go down there and talk to Dr. Howard. He is a person that has answers and insight that no one else that I've met have ever had. So I'm just grateful to him. And he's smart. And while I have the floor, the seat, whatever, I'd like to share some other things we've done at Bethany with Jazz Vespers. An example is when Jimmy Heath was writing his book, he put Bethany in the book because he performed there. Dr. Howard did a conversation/performance with Randy Weston. Dr. Howard interviewed Randy, and Randy would play. Then Dr. Howard would interview him again, and he would play. That's one of the things. We also did the book signing for Jimmy Heath at Bethany. So he's just smart across the board. And I would dare say there aren't many people probably in the world like him. And most of all, he's really, really down to earth. It does not matter who you are, what your profession is, and so on and so forth. I could write a book about him, but I hope I answered.
You
By
did.
the way, when Dr. Howard was minister, I'm going to bust Gary Walker. Gary Walker used to actually go to church to Bethany. Okay,
Yes, he did. And he's watching tonight, by the way, for our viewers.
that's what I said. I'm going to bust him, but that's really good. Yeah.
Dr. Howard, now no, you're not allowed to talk anymore tonight, Dr. Howard. No, of course you can.
I got to recover from that. And this is vital for Shayla, who, I am, by the way, I watched Malcolm X in one day. I was in St. Thomas on a holiday. I watched the whole thing in one day. Outstanding. But let me just say, you hear Liz say she's at Trinity. Trinity is in a predominantly white denomination. And Shayla says, I'm Catholic. So let's be clear about this thing, the Black church. This is the Bill Howard opinion. The Black church is where Black people worship in mass. It does not matter what denomination they are part of. They get the same soul reward when they gather. Trinity is off the chart. You know, Otis is amazing, but so was Jeremiah Wright, you see? And you don't have to be in a predominantly Black denomination to be in this thing that we call the Black church. Am I right, Shayla?
You are 1,000% correct.
Yeah.
You know, I think the nomenclature, I think, throws people because I think when you hear the Black church, it sounds very limiting. It sounds like you're talking about a very specific thing. And I think over the course of our series, you start to understand that that specific thing actually is very universal. And there are a lot of things that make up that thing. And it's not a monolith. And it's everything from a one-room praise house to a 40,000-seat megachurch. Mm-hmm. You know, it's Black Catholics in Baltimore, and it's Trinity United Church of UCC in Chicago, and everything in between. And you know, I think that's the opportunity in this series, is to really show how expansive the notion of the Black church is. That, you know, it's not just the AME, it's not just the Pentecostals, it's not just this or just that. But that it's a spectrum, which is really, you know, exciting, actually.
But the Church of God in Christ has made far more than its ordinary contribution to this glorious music.
Indeed.
Am I telling the truth?
You are preaching it.
It's amazing. That denomination has given us some powerful, and it's been sort of bridge music, gateway music. And I'm thinking of Thomas Dorsey. Mm-hmm. You know, he had exactly this problem with the sort of bifurcation of the music. Mm-hmm. And I had a deacon who was not against jazz vespers, but he was a little cool to it. You know, he didn't know what it had to do with Jesus, right? And lo and behold, first of all, Liz came and hit him in the gut, right? And then Cyrus Chestnut came and played from the hymn book, you know, playing What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and so forth. And then, of course, Ruth Naomi Floyd from Philadelphia. And so many people had their minds open because they saw, as Liz was saying, they saw that Amazing Grace could be sung in a certain style that they were unaccustomed to, but it preserved its depth of meaning. And this is what we have to be about. Any music that speaks to the inner yearnings of the human heart is the music for me.
Lizz Wright, when we hear you sing, we know what's inside you, but when you see this documentary coming up, first of all, who are you going to watch it with? And had church not been a part of your makeup, where would you be?
Wow. I'm going to watch this with my family. I'm especially happy for my father to see it, because I know that he went through a lot trying to figure out how to deal with me while I work through my questions. You know, he respected the fact that I owned them, but he worried about me because I went beyond, his guidance, and so I don't know where I would be without the church. It's hard to think of it honestly, because because of the church, I was rightly assigned from the beginning to sing to the people, and I was rightly assigned to comfort myself and minister to myself as well, and to find my way and change my environment. Or, as Dr. Howard put so beautifully, I had to learn this ancestral practice of making myself at home anywhere by filling a place with my voice and spirit, because that's where you bring the ancestors and you make yourself at home anywhere. And I think that is really the gift the church has given me. And I remember writing Salt. I was in the basement of Georgia State University there in downtown Atlanta, and I was in a little rehearsal room, which truly was the size of a closet, the room wrapped around the sides of this upright piano. And I was just messing around on the black keys, not quite knowing what I was doing, not knowing what the names of those chords were. And I really had some kind of really interesting little visitation of my own. And it's difficult to describe to people, but I knew in that moment that I was I was having some kind of experience, with ancestors, because I was 19 years old, and those kind of words don't come to someone who's 19. I was very stressed out about the idea of, because I had served in church in a ministering capacity under my father. So I took ministry very seriously. I took living a consecrated life extremely seriously. I was a very serious child. I really loved the world of spirituality, but I wanted to sing this music, and I didn't know how to merge the two. And I know that the song Salt was given to me by the elders that walk with me, that I see and don't see, because I would not have known to say, how can you lose your song when you sung it so long? How can you forget your dance when dance is all you ever had? A 19-year-old doesn't even think like that. I think being able to channel and open a space where you can hear from your own bones, the truth that's with you to guide and keep you is an important practice. And I was overwhelmed with it in that moment, though. And I'm so thankful for it, because I felt like Salt was a way for me to know that I was protected and kept, and that I could live in my questions, and that the gift of discovery and learning was from God. It was not something that I needed people to write in for me. And I would be all right if what was in my heart was all right, and that I had control over. And that's what the song really taught me. So I've never felt a complete sense of ownership over that sentiment. I've always felt like as I get older, I continue to try to understand it. And I know that it was sung to me, and I wrote it down. You know what I mean?
Picking up on that age comment, Shayla, do we see that younger people will be watching this PBS documentary? Are they interested still in the church? We can ask Dr. Howard that as well, but the younger divide here when it comes to gospel, when it comes to the Black church, where do you see the younger generation and their music?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And I think that's a big conversation for the church right now. Like, is it still relevant when there's declining church membership, particularly across the United States? I don't regularly go to practice. I'm certainly not a young person in that sense, but But it was important for us to include that perspective in this series. And I think one of the things that we, came to understand is that a lot of the newer generation are looking for a different kind of thing from their churches, right? And some of the churches that have been not as active, not as vocal about certain issues, whether that's social justice or racial justice or gender or sexuality or any of those issues, have alienated a lot of young people from the church. There have been efforts to bring them back into the fold through music by integrating, hip hop and more cultural things. But those are real questions that the church so far hasn't fully answered in terms of where they are in those contemporary movements that are being driven by the young people in this country. And so particularly in this moment now where we've had this massive racial reckoning and Black Lives Matter is, painted on streets across the country. And there are no, clergy at the forefront in the same way that we saw like in the civil rights movement. And so the question is, where is the church? And are those activists, seeing the church as a place where they can, become leaders, where they can find their place, where they can see their values reflected in the actions of the church. And that's not to say that there aren't churches across the country that do reflect those values, because there are. But that's certainly something that's a conversation and a question that's happening right now that we reflect in the series. And, I think young people are an important audience for this series for that reason, because they are the future and they are going to be the people who push the church in this particular direction. And so it is important for them to be a part of this conversation. And so we very much want them to weigh in, to say where we got it wrong, to say where we got it right, and to watch it with their elders. I think that's the really beautiful thing about church, and I've been having these conversations, is that it's one of the few places where there's a lot of sharing of knowledge between multiple generations. And I think that's the beauty and the power of the church, in the same way that happens in schools. There is that same sort of transmission of knowledge and understanding and experience. And so can the church be that place and take on that role in a more concentrated way going forward is something that I think, is part of the conversation that we hope to spark.
Can it, Dr. Howard?
Well, Dorthaan can attest, and maybe Doug, that prior to COVID, I was exposed to every kind of Black young person you can meet. I mean, gangbangers, the whole 9 yards, professionals and so on. I've never met a young person who didn't hunger for spiritual grounding. The question, and I think Shayla makes this point, is whether the church, as it is traditionally framed, in a position to serve as the agency of this spiritual grounding. And let me just say that, in my humble opinion, it's not music so much. It is the infrastructure of churches, tradition, custom, power, formations in the church. We're parents of 3 children. One has been baptized. None of them really go to church. They're extremely ethical people. They are concerned about nature, about the survival of the planet. They're concerned about justice. They want, and they do have, great fellowship. But to some extent, the church is alienating of them in their quest. But the people who pay the tithes in the church are remembering, Liz, how they got over. Do you understand? And the young people have never lived that experience. I mean, this is what bothers me about the music. And Dorthaan and I talk about this. Liz is coming from a deep African heritage. It's in her, and it came through the church. But if you listen to Louis Armstrong, Art Blakey, Mary Lou Williams, to mention a good Catholic, right? If you mention all these musicians, they are playing out of a social ethos that doesn't exist anymore. When Miles played in the South Side of Chicago, he had to stay upstairs over the bar. He couldn't go downtown to the Conrad Hilton. You know, he could in later years, but our music, our church has come out of a condition of overt suffering, overt physical limitation. And though we still have racism in America, our mobility is of a totally different nature. Some of the most technically trained jazz musicians now that I love are teaching in universities, for God's sake. So the church, the old heads in the church are remembering that the church held them together in the face of Jim Crow and de facto. Now, the millennials, they heard about that or they read about it in school. But you know, when my kids hear me talking, they say, oh, Dad is talking about back in the day, right? Back in the day, in the 90s, you know, my Lord, not the 1890s, the 1990s. So that's the challenge of the church. But my young people say to me, and I used to have spaghetti dinners on Friday night. I knew they were hungry and they could come and eat for free. That's a dead giveaway. So they would come. And you know what? They didn't want to get rid of the hymns. They didn't want to get rid of the anthems. They loved the gospel choir. So it's not really the music. It's the culture. It's the homophobic dimension. It's the negation of women dimension. And for God's sake, who goes to a church service at 3:30 in the afternoon to celebrate the ushers? You see, when we had nothing else to do, that made perfect sense. But in Bethany, for example, which is a little bit of a sophisticated place, not many of the members went to the, Dorthaan is an 8 o'clock person. Then you got the 11 o'clock people, but you don't have any 3:30 people. Most of our churches have these afternoon services when the ushers walk down the aisle and all of that stuff. That was beautiful in another day, but it still brings comfort to people of a certain age. Now, here is an American problem, and I'll make this last point. We often associate problems that we have with race. You know, it's a Black thing, it's racism. The truth is, America in general is the only society that I think I can recall I've been in, which does not have a deep commitment to the elders and looking to the elders as transferring cultural knowledge, wisdom, and so forth. We just, I mean, old folk are like units of labor, and when they retire, they're almost not important. And if we could cultivate that, at least in our sphere, so that, and Liz, I know you are there. I just listen, I hear it in your voice, even if you don't articulate the words. I love me some old people. They are funny. They lie. But they are precious. And the culture doesn't promote that. I don't care what race you're in. And when our young people start a movement, it's almost like there was no movement before. And so I keep my mouth shut because I don't want to presume that they want to hear what I have to say. I just hate to see them, as they say, reinvent the wheel every time. We knew things in 1968 that our best and brightest young people now or rediscovering because they didn't learn it from us.
Let me stop you there because I want to just pass along a couple of things. Kalia says, it's been so wonderful to be able to share Bethany's Jazz Vespers with all the generations of her family, from her 12-year-old grandson to her mom in her 90s, relatives and friends visiting from out of town. Jazz Vespers always first stop. DK, Dorthaan, Kirk, NEA Jazz Master. What's a comment like that do for you, knowing that this has been such a success to bring music into the church and bringing top people like Lizz Wright and making a difference in people's lives?
It has been one of the most rewarding experiences in my life. And by the way, I know Kalia. She's one of the very, very, very supportive. And she has been ever since she moved back home to Newark. And she did bring her mother, I think from the pulpit. I wished her mother probably her 90th birthday. But see, to me, Jazz Vespers has been, as Dr. Howard said, my ministry, because people come to Jazz Vespers, and when we started, I stood up there in the pulpit and I said to them, because I know how people in our area supported jazz, I said, you're not going to know everybody that we bring in here, but please come back. I promise you one thing, we will only bring you the best. And we have. And what I do is I hire the leader, but it's not just the leader performing. So as nervous as I am, even after 20 years, and I learned a lot from Gary hosting concerts. He used to say, I gotta find a nugget. I gotta find a nugget. And so I decided that each side person, I would give 3, 4, 5 sentences about him or her so that I could educate the audience as to who they were listening to. Everybody knows the leader, whether it's Liz, whether it's Gregory Porter. And by the way, we had Gregory Porter at our church twice. They know the big names, but they don't know those other talented artists that are performing with them that's got this degree, that degree, and so on and so forth. So I do know that I have made a difference because people will come up to me, and this really makes you feel good. It makes you feel like your work was not in vain, because it's work. 9 first Saturdays of the month, leading up to that Saturday, I go on the computer. Let's say it's 4 people in the group plus the leader. Most times I know about the leader, plus we would print his bio in the program. But I would have to go online, read about all those artists, and come up with whatever I was going to say about them. But it worked, and hopefully I introduced the musicians to a different audience and vice versa. And while I have the floor, Dr. Howard did something else. In August every year, our choirs at Bethany are on vacation. We have several choirs. Guess what Dr. Howard did? He came up with the idea in August we would have jazz for our regular service. And I tell you, the Cyrus Chestnut is one that has performed it. Ruth Naomi Floyd generally comes the first Saturday in August. So we not only have Jazz Vespers at Bethany every first Saturday for 9 months, we have jazz for our regular service, and it's packed because not only do our own members come, it also attracts people from the community that otherwise might not have even thought to come to church. And while you all were talking about Amazing Grace, I never will forget, and I hope Deacon Cosby is listening. When we had Gregory Porter for our regular service, we had already had him for Vespers a while back. Gregory Porter, with his pianist, stood up there and sang Amazing Grace. And I had never, it was just awesome. And Deacon Cosby had bought his CD. He went home and played it. He sent me a text. I've been listening to Gregory Porter all afternoon. So that's kind of our experiences at Bethany. And I just wanted to share all that.
Thanks, DK. Gary Walker says heritage and tradition require the comfort to look over your shoulder for forward momentum. Lizz Wright, you know all about that. When you think of now, when you're looking at this documentary and you see some of the performances that are going on years ago, what are you thinking about now? What are you thinking about a performance for younger people? What do they need to hear from Lizz Wright in order to bring them into the fold?
Wow. I don't know. I have to say that I don't know what people need to hear. I know what my soul needs, and I can never guess what's in it for other people. I just can't do it. I can't prescribe a sound or a message. I have to just find my alignment and get the sound out in a way that is authentic and healing to me, and then I let people have their own response to it. In a way, I try to have a relationship with material and with my voice that is a little more elemental, because I just don't know what it means to people. I can never know, and people continue to surprise me, young and old, about what the music or a performance means to them. And I don't know how to plan for that. I mean, I do think, as Nina Simone said, it is an artist's job to, respond to and reflect on the times, the present moment, while we can do other things, we must do that. So however that shows up for me in a way that is authentic to my own soul, I just have to trust what that does out in the world. I can't really steer it. I can't tell people what to think or how to look at things, but I do trust that we can be guided by what we feel. I think one person trying to do something that feels authentic and healing to themselves puts off a light that someone can use to look at something they need to look at. But I can't tell them where to look. All I can do is try to get myself to turn on and find a new way to get lit up no matter what's happening. That's kind of where I feel my work is. And then after that, I have to trust people to, do what they need to with that.
Speaking of work.
Don't stop, Lizz. Look, let me say this.
Fancy way to say I don't know.
we got to make it quick, Dr. Howard. Just
be quick. I was in the office of the church one day, and 3 young brothers straight out of Jamesburg, which is a youth prison in New Jersey. And I had on a recording of meter hymns, okay? And they were going. I mean, the guy lines the hymn and the congregation comes in. These kids came in, they said, "Doc, what is that?" I said, "Oh, that's a meter hymn. They're lining the hymn." And so he said, "Wow." They sat down and remained speechless until the music went off. The point is, don't patronize young people. Sing with integrity in the way that Lizz is describing. It will touch their souls. Don't overlay them with a whole bunch of outmoded traditions and practices, but they can hear this music. That's what I'll say there.
Andrew says, great work and great to see Shayla Harris's involvement with this project. Shayla, I want to give you a couple of minutes here to tell us why, once again, we should watch this documentary coming up on the 16th and 17th at 9 p.m. on PBS, and maybe a quick conversation that you and Dr. Gates had that really meant the most to you.
Yeah, I appreciate Andy Laren is an old colleague, so I appreciate his shout out. And I mean, I think this has been a really beautiful conversation. I really appreciate you all including me and the work that I'm doing and in this. And, thank you, Liz, for sharing your gift. It's so beautiful. And even though you were vamping, saying I don't really know, I empathize with that as a journalist and as a storyteller. I've been in that position many times. But I think what I took away from what you said, and it's something that I also try to do as a documentary filmmaker, as a storyteller, is, as long as I do my work with intention, then you can't really control what anyone else takes away or likes or doesn't like about what you do. You just hope that if you're putting things out in good faith, that people will take them in that way. And so that's what we are doing with this series. We put a lot of energy into it, months and months and months of work, a lot of tears, a lot of sweat. And, I hope it shows, and I hope people appreciate that. And I also hope it sparks some really honest conversations about the role of the church in people's lives. And, I really do hope people take something meaningful from it, especially in this dark time, about the importance of community and faith and resilience and that it touches people. And, I will just say that the most moving part for me was actually going back home to Dr. Gates, went back to his home church, where he hadn't been for a really long time. It was very much the prodigal son coming home after growing off and leaving his small town and going off to glory and coming back. And there was some trepidation about that. And it was actually the most moving part of everything that we did. I still I'm getting choked up right now, even just talking about it. And I cried. And just the warm embrace of that community for him, this person who they had invested all this energy in and they were clearly proud of him, was just really, really moving. And to me, I think it's just a metaphor for what the church does for people. And, I hope that's what people can take away, that, even though the Black church as a definition feels very specific, that the themes within it are actually quite universal. And I hope people can appreciate that.
Shayla, when Dr. Howard is shaking his head in agreement, you have touched the right spot, the right moment. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up now. And I want to thank our panel members this evening, including the incredible producer-director Shayla Harris. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Bill Howard, singer Lizz Wright, and of course, NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, learning more about the Black church and learning more about your personal experiences with the church and what it means to you. It's been a pleasure to be your host tonight. You've got lots of love tonight here on Facebook Live. All of you have had people talk about how much they love each of you. Liz, keep on singing with that beautiful voice. Thanks for joining us tonight. Dr. Howard, can't thank you enough. DK, right here. You're always here for us. And Shayla, congratulations. The PBS documentary will air on the 16th and 17th at 9 p.m. For more information, you can go to pbs.org/blackchurch. The doc is airing on 13 at those times on Tuesday and Wednesday. This program is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people, and of course, you, the members of WBGO. I'm Doug Doyle. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the Black Church on PBS, and keep supporting WBGO, the world's greatest jazz station. Good night, everyone.